world of warriors and kings where courage was the currency of greatness, one man stood out, not for his crown, but for his fearless heart. Benaiah, the son of Jehoiada, was no ordinary soldier. He chased a lion into a pit on a snowy day and killed it. He faced a towering Egyptian warrior armed with only a staff and walked away victorious. He fought with the kind of reckless faith that made men into legends, and that legend led him from the battlefields to the right hand of King Solomon. But his story is more than just battles and bravery. It's a testament to divine destiny, relentless faith, and the power of a warrior's heart. Are you ready to uncover the full story of one of the Bible's most unsung heroes? To truly understand the significance of Benaiah's journey, we must first step back into the world he was born into. It was a time of turmoil and transition, an era when Israel was caught between its past as a loose confederation of tribes and its future as a mighty kingdom. The land was restless, filled with warring nations, shifting alliances, and the ever-present threat of foreign invasion. Israel's first king, Saul, had been chosen by God to lead, but his reign was marked by both military success and personal failure. He had victories, but he also had disobedience. His initial triumphs against the Philistines, the Amalekites, and other enemies of Israel were overshadowed by his growing instability, paranoia, and eventual rejection by God. As Saul's grip on the throne weakened, the shadow of another figure began to rise, the young shepherd from Bethlehem named David. David's ascent to power was anything but conventional. He was anointed by the prophet Samuel while Saul was still king, marking the beginning of a divine shift in leadership. He was a warrior, a poet, a musician, and a man after God's own heart. His stunning victory over Goliath propelled him into the national spotlight, and soon he became a commander in Saul's army. But Saul's jealousy turned him into an enemy, forcing David into years of exile, where he gathered a following of mighty men, fierce warriors who would become the backbone of his eventual kingdom. These were not ordinary soldiers. They were men of extraordinary skill, courage, and loyalty, drawn to David's leadership like iron to a magnet. It was in this crucible of conflict and the fires of war and survival that Benaiah would rise. The importance of warriors in ancient Israel cannot be overstated. This was a time when battles determined the fate of nations, when the strength of a kingdom was measured by the valor of its fighting men. Israel's enemies were relentless: Philistines, Amalekites, Moabites, Syrians, all seeking to weaken or destroy the people of God. Every able-bodied man was expected to fight, but there were some who stood above the rest, men whose names became synonymous with victory. Israel's mighty warriors were not just skilled in combat. They were defenders of the covenant, protectors of God's people, instruments of divine justice. In a world where kings were often defined by the strength of their armies, these warriors shaped history with their swords. Benaiah's story is unique among these warriors. While many of David's mighty men were known for their battlefield exploits, Benaiah's legacy extended far beyond war. His feats of courage were legendary, but his greatest battles were not fought for personal glory or conquest. He was a man of unwavering loyalty, a warrior priest whose lineage connected him to the spiritual leadership of Israel. Unlike Joab, David's ruthless military commander, Benaiah was not just a man of war. He was a man of righteousness. He knew how to wield a sword, but he also knew how to follow God's will without question. His journey would take him from the ranks of the elite warriors to one of the most powerful positions in the kingdom. While others sought power for themselves, Benaiah's strength came from his faith, his discipline, and his ability to execute justice with both wisdom and precision. Most warriors of his time sought glory in battle, but Benaiah's path was different. He was not just a soldier, he was a guardian, a protector of the anointed. When David ascended the throne, he did not forget the men who had stood by him during his darkest hours. Among them, Benaiah was given a role unlike any other. Commander of the Cherethites and the Pelethites, the king's personal bodyguards. This was a position of immense trust, one that required not only skill in battle, but also wisdom, loyalty, and an unwavering commitment to the king. Benaiah was entrusted with the life of Israel's ruler. a responsibility that placed him closer to power than most could ever imagine. But his influence did not end with David. When the time came for Solomon to take the throne, it was Benaiah who ensured a smooth transition of power. In a kingdom where political intrigue could be as deadly as a battlefield, Benaiah became the enforcer of divine justice. He was the man who carried out Solomon's first acts of judgment, eliminating those who threatened the stability of the throne. He executed Adonijah, the rebellious son of David, who tried to usurp the kingdom. He struck down Joab, the former commander of the army, whose unchecked ambition had made him a liability. He silenced Shimei, the man who had cursed David in his time of weakness. Benaiah's sword was not driven by personal vendetta, but by obedience to the will of God and the command of the rightful king. Despite all of this, Benaiah's story is often overshadowed by other biblical figures. He was not a king like David or Solomon. He was not a prophet like Samuel or Elijah. He was not a priest in the traditional sense, though his father was a high-ranking spiritual leader. Instead, he was something rare, a warrior with the heart of a servant, a man of action who never lost sight of his purpose. He was a man who knew when to fight, when to protect, and when to execute justice. His story is one of balance, between strength and submission, between battle and obedience, between power and righteousness. As we journey through the life of Benaiah, we will uncover not just the events that shaped his destiny, but the deeper lessons his story holds. What does it mean to be truly courageous? How does faith shape the way we fight our battles? What can we learn from a man who stood at the right hand of kings, yet remained unwavering in his devotion to God? The life of Benaiah is not just a tale of ancient warfare. It is a blueprint for modern faith, a story of resilience, trust, and the kind of strength that comes not from weapons, but from walking in divine purpose. His name may not be as widely known as David's or Solomon's, but his legacy is no less powerful. This is the complete story of Benaiah, son of Jehoiada, a man of valor, a warrior of faith, and one of the greatest unsung heroes of the Bible. Benaiah was born into a lineage that carried both spiritual authority and military distinction. His father, Jehoiada, was no ordinary man. As recorded in 1 Chronicles 27 verse 5, Jehoiada was the chief priest, a man of great influence who stood as a bridge between Israel's leadership and its devotion to God. This meant that Benaiah grew up in a household where faith, duty, and discipline were inseparable. From an early age, he would have been surrounded by priests who ministered before the Lord, men who carried the weight of spiritual responsibility, ensuring that Israel remained aligned with the commands of God. But his father was not just a man of prayer. He was also a warrior in his own right, a leader who commanded respect not only in the temple, but also in the kingdom. Unlike many priests who devoted themselves solely to religious matters, Jehoiada was deeply involved in the affairs of state, providing counsel and wisdom to kings, and ensuring that both the spiritual and military strength of Israel remained intact. Growing up under such a figure shaped Benaiah in ways that set him apart from other warriors of his time. Unlike those who learned warfare as a means of personal gain or political ambition, Benaiah was trained in the ways of righteousness first. His foundation was built not only on physical strength, but on the unwavering belief that his victories would come through God's favor, not just his own abilities. His education would have included the laws of Moses, the history of Israel's conquests, and the sacred role that warriors played in defending God's chosen people. From childhood, he understood that battle was not just about defeating enemies, but about executing divine justice. His name, Benaiah, carried profound meaning. In Hebrew, it means "the Lord builds" or "Yahweh has built," a name that reflected divine purpose and strength. His very identity was a declaration that his life was not his own, but was fashioned by God's hands. This belief would follow him into every battle, every decision, and every act of service he performed throughout his life. He was not a self-made warrior. He was a man built by the Lord for a greater calling. Every victory he would go on to achieve, every challenge he would overcome, was a fulfillment of the purpose embedded in his name. But Benaiah was not just a child of privilege. He did not rely on his father's reputation or his lineage to carve his place in Israel's history. He trained, fought, and proved himself among men who had no reason to give him special treatment. His early training was rigorous, shaped by both the discipline of the priesthood and the demands of the battlefield. His father, though a priest, understood the necessity of physical strength in a world where war was a constant threat. Benaiah would have been trained in the art of combat, the use of the sword and spear, the strategies of battle, and the endurance required to survive long campaigns. But alongside these skills, he was also trained in prayer, worship, and obedience to God. He was taught that true strength was not just in wielding weapons, but in understanding when and why to use them. His first experiences as a warrior were not in grand battles but in smaller conflicts, moments where he had to prove himself in ways that others would remember. He was likely involved in early military campaigns, skirmishes where he learned the brutality of war firsthand. He had to face not only external enemies, but also the expectations placed upon him as the son of Jehoiada. Every battle he entered, every mission he undertook, was more than just a test of skill. It was a test of character. Would he fight for glory, or would he fight for God's purpose? Would he seek personal gain, or would he serve with humility? These questions shaped him into the warrior he would become, a man known not only for his ability to strike down enemies, but for his unwavering loyalty and righteousness. As Benaiah's reputation grew, so did his responsibilities. He was no ordinary soldier. He was a warrior with a calling. His strength, his wisdom, and his fearless heart made him stand out among the ranks. He did not rise to prominence through politics or alliances, but through sheer devotion and unmatched skill in battle. By the time he entered the service of King David, he was already a man whose name carried weight, a fighter whose presence on the battlefield meant the difference between victory and defeat. His journey from the son of a priest to one of Israel's greatest warriors was not accidental. It was forged through years of training, through lessons taught by his father, through battles that tested his resolve, and through the unwavering belief that his strength came from the Lord. His name, his lineage, and his reputation were not just markers of his identity, they were the very foundation upon which his destiny was built. And soon, the world would witness the full measure of his strength, as he would go on to perform feats that would become legendary in Israel's history. As Benaiah grew into manhood, his reputation as a warrior began to take shape. The foundation laid by his father, Jehoiada, had instilled in him the values of discipline, faith, and unwavering loyalty. But Benaiah was not content with merely being the son of a chief priest. He understood that in a land where kingdoms rose and fell by the strength of their warriors, his destiny would not be found in the confines of the temple, but on the battlefield. His training intensified as he mastered the art of war. He learned to wield the sword with precision, to fight with endurance, and to outthink his enemies in the chaos of battle. His strength was not merely physical, it was fortified by a deep sense of purpose. He was not fighting for personal glory or wealth. He was fighting to uphold the righteousness of God's chosen people. His first true tests as a warrior came not in grand conflicts, but in moments that required swift judgment, skill, and the courage to stand alone. These were the battles that would define him, the moments where his name would first be spoken with admiration. Unlike many warriors who relied on the strength of armies, Benaiah's early victories were often fought in isolation, facing enemies that should have overwhelmed him. He did not have the political backing of generals or the inherited command of a military leader. What he had was the favor of God and the willingness to face impossible odds. One of his earliest recorded feats was his legendary battle against a lion in a pit on a snowy day. The sheer intensity of this event speaks volumes about Benaiah's courage. A lion was no ordinary enemy. It was a beast of unmatched ferocity, a symbol of terror in the ancient world. Most men, even seasoned warriors, would have considered such a battle suicidal. But Benaiah did not hesitate. He pursued the lion into the pit, knowing that retreat was not an option. The ground was treacherous, the snow making every step uncertain, but he pressed forward. He did not face the lion with a bow from a safe distance. He entered its domain, fought it up close, and emerged victorious. This was not just an act of brute strength. It was a testament to his fearless spirit. He was a man who did not run from danger but confronted it head-on, willing to risk everything to prove that he was not afraid of any enemy, whether man or beast. His next great challenge came against two mighty Moabite warriors, men of great stature and skill. The Moabites had long been enemies of Israel, known for their fierce warriors and strategic warfare. These two men were not ordinary soldiers. They were champions, the kind of warriors whose names were feared in battle. But Benaiah did not see them as insurmountable threats. He faced them alone and defeated them, proving that his strength was not just in his hands, but in the confidence that he carried. He fought with the certainty that God was with him, that his victories were not his alone, but were divinely appointed. Perhaps one of the most astonishing feats of his early career was his encounter with an Egyptian warrior, a man of great height, armed with a massive spear. This Egyptian was no common soldier. He was a giant among men, equipped with a weapon that could have skewered any opponent from a distance. Benaiah, armed with nothing but a staff, should have been at a disadvantage. But his mind was as sharp as his sword. He did not engage in a direct contest of strength, knowing that the Egyptian's spear would give him reach and power. Instead, he used his speed and intelligence, striking first, disarming the giant, and taking the spear from his own hand before using it to deliver the final blow. This was not just a demonstration of combat skill. It was a masterful display of strategy, proving that strength alone was not enough to win battles. It was the mind and spirit that made the true warrior. These feats were more than just acts of bravery. They were defining moments that set Benaiah apart from other men. He had fought against beasts, against warriors of renown, against impossible odds, and he had triumphed. His name was no longer just that of a priest's son. He was now a warrior whose strength was whispered throughout Israel, a man whose reputation had begun to reach the ears of those who mattered most. His victories had earned him the respect of soldiers, the admiration of the people, and most importantly, the attention of King David himself. David, a warrior king who valued strength and loyalty above all, saw in Benaiah something rare. A man who fought not for personal gain, but for righteousness. In a kingdom where power was constantly shifting and loyalty was often fleeting, Benaiah was different. He was a man who could be trusted, a man whose devotion to God and to his king was unshakable. His exploits had proven that he was not only strong but wise, not only fearless but righteous. And so David called him into his service, bringing him into the ranks of the most elite warriors in Israel, the mighty men. Benaiah's journey from the son of a priest to one of the greatest warriors in Israel was not an accident. It was the result of years of training, faith, and relentless determination. He had built his reputation not through politics or alliances, but through sheer strength of character. He had faced lions, giants, and warriors of legend, and each time he had emerged victorious. But his greatest battles were still ahead. The trials that would define his legacy, the conflicts that would test not just his strength but his loyalty, were yet to come. He had proven himself as a warrior, but soon he would be called to prove himself as something even greater, a leader, a protector, and a man who would shape the destiny of Israel for generations to come. Benaiah's rise to greatness was marked by feats so extraordinary that they were recorded in Scripture, preserved for generations as proof of his courage, strength, and divine favor. Among the warriors of Israel, he was not merely another fighter. He was a man whose exploits bordered on the impossible, a warrior whose deeds stood as a testament to God's power working through him. His legendary acts of valor were not just physical triumphs. They were moments where human effort met divine intervention, where skill alone could not account for the victories he achieved. These were the moments that would etch his name into history, securing his place as one of the most feared and respected warriors in all of Israel. One of the most awe-inspiring stories of Benaiah's life was the day he descended into a pit to slay a lion on a snowy day. In 2 Samuel 23 verse 20, the Bible records this astonishing act. And Benaiah the son of Jehoiada, the son of a valiant man of Kabzeel, who had done many acts, he slew 2 lion-like men of Moab. He went down also and slew a lion in the midst of a pit in time of snow. This single verse encapsulates a feat that defies logic. A lion, one of the most fearsome predators known to man, was a creature to be avoided at all costs, especially in conditions where movement was difficult and escape was impossible. But Benaiah did not hesitate. He did not trap the lion from a distance or wait for it to be weakened. He pursued it, going down into the pit where there was no way out except through victory or death. The ground was icy, the air cold, and the conditions treacherous. Yet he willingly put himself in an environment where his footing would be unsteady, where the lion had the advantage. And yet, despite every disadvantage, he emerged victorious. This was not just an act of bravery. It was a demonstration of his unwavering confidence that God was with him in battle. Many warriors could kill with a sword, but how many would dare take on a lion with no escape? The imagery of this battle is profound, descending into the darkness of a pit, facing the roaring beast alone in the cold and uncertain terrain. It was a test not just of skill, but of faith. Benaiah's victory here was not just over the lion, it was over fear itself. He had proven that he was a man who did not shrink back from the impossible, a man who would go wherever he was called, no matter the danger. His encounter with the lion alone would have been enough to set him apart, but Benaiah was far from finished. The same verse records another feat of unmatched skill and courage, the defeat of two mighty Moabite warriors. These were not ordinary men. They were described as lion-like men, a phrase that suggests they were fierce, intimidating, and unmatched in battle. The Moabites were a nation known for their warriors, skilled in combat and ruthless in their pursuit of victory. To take down two of their greatest fighters was not just an act of personal triumph, it was a strategic and symbolic victory. Benaiah, standing alone, faced two men who were bred for war, men who had likely never known defeat. Yet he overcame them both, not by numbers or trickery, but by sheer dominance in combat. These men were likely champions, warriors whose names inspired fear among their enemies. To defeat them would have been seen as an act of the gods among other nations. But Benaiah did not rely on strength alone. His victories, time and time again, were the result of something greater than human ability. He fought with the knowledge that the God of Israel was on his side, that his battles were not his alone to fight. This was not about personal gain or glory. This was about demonstrating that those who walk in obedience to the Lord will always triumph over those who rely on their own power. If the lion and the Moabite warriors were not enough, Benaiah's legend reached another level when he faced an Egyptian giant in single combat. In 2 Samuel 23, verse 21, the Bible describes this extraordinary event. And he slew an Egyptian, a goodly man, and the Egyptian had a spear in his hand. But he went down to him with a staff, and plucked the spear out of the Egyptian's hand, and slew him with his own spear. The phrase "a goodly man" in this passage does not merely mean that the Egyptian was large, it implies that he was of immense stature, likely a warrior of great renown. This was not just an enemy soldier, it was a champion, a man whose very presence on the battlefield would have inspired terror. Yet, Benaiah did not hesitate. Unlike Goliath, who had faced David with arrogance and mockery, this Egyptian warrior came fully prepared, armed with a massive spear, giving him a reach that made it nearly impossible for an ordinary soldier to get close. Benaiah, however, entered the fight with only a staff, a weapon that seemed inadequate against such an opponent. But what happened next was a testament to his skill, strategy, and divine favor. Rather than engage in a reckless charge, Benaiah outmaneuvered the Egyptian, seizing control of the spear and turning the enemy's own weapon against him. It was a masterstroke of combat brilliance, a move that showed he was not just a brute force warrior, but a tactician, a thinker, and a man who understood how to use every advantage to win. These three exploits, slaying a lion in a pit on a snowy day, defeating the two Moabite champions, and overcoming the Egyptian giant armed only with a staff, cemented Benaiah's place as a warrior unlike any other. His feats were not mere demonstrations of strength. They were moments where God's hand was clearly upon him. They were battles that should have ended in his death, yet each time he emerged victorious. He did not win by numbers, by deceit, or by sheer luck. He won because he fought in the name of the Lord, and no enemy, no beast, no giant could stand against him. Benaiah's rise was not political. He did not seek power, nor did he manipulate his way into prominence. He earned his place through faithfulness, fearlessness, and absolute trust in God. His victories did not go unnoticed. Among David's warriors, there were many mighty, but Benaiah's name stood out. He was not only a fierce fighter, but a man of honor, discipline, and righteousness. In a kingdom where warriors were plentiful, what made Benaiah unique was that his battles were always personal. He did not hide behind armies. He faced the enemy alone, proving that true strength is not in numbers, but in the courage to stand when others would flee. His name became legendary, whispered among soldiers as the one who could not be defeated, the one who had faced lions, giants, and champions, and emerged stronger each time. His exploits were not just written for admiration, they carried deeper spiritual meaning. Each victory represented something greater than mere combat. The lion in the pit symbolized the trials that come without warning, the battles fought in isolation where only faith can lead to triumph. The Moabite warriors represented the opposition of the world, forces that seek to intimidate and overpower, but ultimately fall before those who walk in righteousness. The Egyptian giant stood for impossible odds, the challenges that seem insurmountable until God turns the enemy's own weapons against him. Through these feats, Benaiah's legacy was sealed. He was not just a warrior, he was a man whose strength came from a source far greater than himself. And because of that, his rise was far from over. He was destined for more than just battle. He was destined to stand beside kings, to execute justice, and to play a role in shaping the future of Israel. His exploits had proven that he was no ordinary soldier. He was a man of valor, faith, and destiny, a man whose story was only just beginning. Benaiah's reputation as a warrior had already begun to spread, and his astonishing feats had made him a name to be reckoned with. But it was not enough to be strong or courageous. Many men in Israel possessed those qualities. What set Benaiah apart was his unwavering loyalty, his discipline, and his complete trust in God. These attributes made him more than just another fighter. They made him a man that King David could trust, a warrior worthy of standing among Israel's most elite soldiers. His rise was not immediate, nor was it political. He did not seek recognition or manipulate his way into power. Every promotion he received was the result of his unwavering dedication to David, to Israel, and to the Lord. As David's kingdom expanded, it became clear that Israel needed more than just an army. It needed an elite force, a band of warriors whose skill, courage, and loyalty could be counted on in the most dangerous situations. These were not just men who could fight, they were men who could be entrusted with the safety of the king and the nation. And among them, Benaiah stood out. He was soon counted among David's 30 mighty men, an elite group of warriors who were the best of the best. In 2 Samuel 23, verse 22-23, it is written, "These things did Benaiah, the son of Jehoiada, and had the name among 3 mighty men. He was more honorable than the 30, but he attained not to the first 3, and David set him over his guard." This passage makes it clear. Benaiah was not only part of David's most elite warriors, but he was also set over the king's personal guard, a position of supreme trust and authority. This appointment was no small honor. David, who had spent years on the run from Saul, understood better than anyone the importance of having trustworthy men around him. Loyalty was everything. He had seen betrayal firsthand, had known what it meant to have enemies both outside and within his own people. For David to set Benaiah over his personal guard was a statement. It meant that Benaiah was one of the most trusted men in Israel, a warrior who would lay down his life to protect the king and his household. Benaiah was not placed over just any group of soldiers. He was made captain over the Sherethites and Pelethites, an elite force that served as David's personal bodyguards. In 2 Samuel 8, verse 18, it is recorded, "And Benaiah the son of Jehoiada was over both the Cherethites and the Pelethites, and David's sons were chief rulers." These men were not ordinary warriors. They were a special unit, trained for rapid response, personal security, and handling the most dangerous assignments. They were the elite guard, much like the modern-day equivalent of special forces, trained to protect the king from both foreign and domestic threats. Benaiah's role as the leader of David's personal guard placed him in direct contrast with Joab, the commander of Israel's army. While both were great warriors, they were vastly different in their leadership styles and character. Joab was ruthless, cunning, and politically driven, a man who would do whatever was necessary to maintain power, even if it meant betraying his own allies. He had been loyal to David, but his loyalty was often mixed with self-interest. He had disobeyed direct orders, assassinated men who stood in his way, and at times acted out of vengeance rather than righteousness. Benaiah, on the other hand, was a man of unwavering integrity. He was not one to scheme, nor did he use deception to gain power. His loyalty was pure. He followed orders, but he also followed God's will. Unlike Joab, who often took matters into his own hands regardless of David's commands, Benaiah always sought to act in righteousness. He did not kill for personal gain. He killed only in service to justice and divine command. This made him a rare figure in David's court. A warrior who could be trusted completely, a man whose hands were strong in battle but clean of treachery. During David's reign, Benaiah fought in many conflicts, proving time and again that his skill in battle was unparalleled. He fought in campaigns against the Philistines, the Ammonites, the Moabites, and the Edomites, playing a crucial role in securing Israel's borders and expanding its influence. His role in these wars was not just as a warrior, but as a leader, one who ensured victory while upholding the values of righteousness and obedience to God. One of the greatest challenges David faced was internal rebellion, particularly the uprising of Absalom, David's own son. This was a dangerous time for Israel, a moment where the kingdom could have been torn apart from within. Many warriors and leaders had to choose sides. Would they remain loyal to David, or would they follow Absalom's rebellion? Joab, despite his flaws, remained on David's side, but his methods were once again questionable. He killed Absalom against David's explicit orders, leading to great grief within the kingdom. Benaiah, ever loyal, stood by David through the entire conflict, ensuring that his king remained safe, his throne secure, and justice upheld. Another critical moment in David's reign was Sheba's rebellion, when a man named Sheba led a revolt against David after Absalom's death. This was a test of David's authority. If Sheba succeeded, Israel could have fractured permanently. Joab led the campaign to quash the rebellion, but as always, he acted with brutality, executing Amasa, another general, simply to ensure that he remained in control of the army. Benaiah, though involved in protecting the king during this crisis, stayed away from political assassinations, further proving that he was a man of honor, not just a man of war. Through every battle, every rebellion, and every political upheaval, Benaiah remained steadfast, unshaken, and fiercely loyal to David. His presence in the king's court was not merely as a warrior, but as a guardian of righteousness, a man whose strength was matched only by his integrity. Unlike Joab, who would eventually fall out of favor due to his ruthless ambition, Benaiah's faithfulness ensured that his rise to power was not tainted by treachery. His years of service under David prepared him for even greater responsibilities. Though he had spent much of his life as a warrior, he was being shaped into something more than just a soldier. He was being molded for leadership, for a role that would extend far beyond the battlefield. He had proven himself in combat, in loyalty, and in faith, and soon his destiny would call him to stand at the right hand of kings. Benaiah's time in David's army was more than just a chapter in his life. It was a refinement, a proving ground where he became a man capable of leading an entire nation's military. His story was not just about battles won, but about faithfulness, honor, and the understanding that true strength comes not from the sword alone, but from a heart devoted to God. As David's reign drew to a close, the kingdom stood on the brink of transition, and Benaiah's loyalty would soon be tested in a way that would determine not just his own fate, but the fate of Israel itself. As King David grew old and his strength began to wane, a storm of political ambition swept through the royal court. The question of succession loomed over Israel. Who would take the throne after David? Though it had long been declared that Solomon was God's chosen heir, not everyone was willing to accept this divine plan. Power, wealth, and influence had made the throne of Israel one of the most coveted positions in the ancient world, and among David's sons, there were those who saw an opportunity to claim it for themselves. At the center of this unfolding crisis was Adonijah, David's eldest surviving son, a man whose ambition would lead to open rebellion, and standing in opposition to him was Benaiah, a warrior whose loyalty would once again prove unshakable. Adonijah, seeing his father weakened with age, decided that the time was right to seize the throne by force. He understood that Solomon, though favored by God, was young and lacked the military backing needed to secure his claim. In 1 Kings 1 verse 5-7, the Bible describes how Adonijah made his move. Then Adonijah the son of Haggith exalted himself, saying, "I will be king," and he prepared him chariots and horsemen, and 50 men to run before him. And his father had not displeased him at any time in saying, "Why hast thou done so?" And he also was a very goodly man. And his mother bare him after Absalom. And he conferred with Joab the son of Zeruiah, and with Abiathar the priest, and they following Adonijah helped him. Adonijah's strategy was calculated. He gathered powerful allies, Joab the commander of the army, and Abiathar the high priest. These were not insignificant men. They were some of the most influential figures in Israel. With Joab's military strength and Abiathar's religious authority, Adonijah believed he could secure the throne without opposition. He arranged a lavish ceremony, a public declaration of his kingship, complete with sacrifices and a feast, designed to win the support of the people. But there was one crucial flaw in his plan. Not everyone in David's kingdom was willing to betray God's chosen heir. While Adonijah was gathering his forces, a counterforce was preparing to ensure that Solomon, the rightful king, would take the throne. The prophet Nathan, recognizing the danger, alerted Bathsheba, Solomon's mother, and together they brought the matter before David. Though David was weak, his mind was still sharp, and he knew that God's will must prevail. It was at this moment that Benaiah stepped forward, not as a man seeking power for himself, but as a warrior who understood the weight of divine loyalty. He had served David faithfully for years, and now he would serve his son with the same unwavering devotion. In 1 Kings 1 verse 36-38, Benaiah was one of the key figures who ensured that Solomon was crowned king before Adonijah could solidify his grip on the kingdom. And Benaiah the son of Jehoiada answered the king and said, "Amen. The Lord God of my lord the king say so too. As the Lord hath been with my lord the king, even so be he with Solomon, and make his throne greater than the throne of my lord King David." So Zadok the priest, and Nathan the prophet, and Benaiah the son of Jehoiada, and the Sherethites and the Pelethites went down and caused Solomon to ride upon King David's mule, and brought him to Gihon. This act was not just symbolic. It was a direct challenge to Adonijah's claim. By placing Solomon on David's mule and anointing him in public, they were making a statement. The true king had been chosen, and no amount of political maneuvering could change that. The people saw this, and immediately the balance of power shifted. Adonijah's feast, which had been a celebration of his supposed victory, turned into a moment of panic. Word spread quickly that Solomon had been crowned, and those who had supported Adonijah began to scatter in fear. His rebellion had been cut down before it could truly begin. But Adonijah was not done yet. Though he had been spared initially, his ambition remained. He attempted a final desperate move, seeking to marry Abishag, the young woman who had cared for David in his last days. This was more than a request for marriage. It was a strategic move to legitimize his claim to the throne. In the ancient world, marrying a former king's concubine was seen as an assertion of royal authority. Solomon, seeing through the deception, knew that Adonijah could not be allowed to live, and so he turned to the one man he could trust to carry out the sentence, Benaiah. In 1 Kings 2 verse 25, the Bible records the moment that Benaiah executed Adonijah, and King Solomon sent by the hand of Benaiah the son of Jehoiada, and he fell upon him that he died. There was no hesitation, no mercy. Adonijah had defied God's will, and justice had to be served. Benaiah, a warrior who had fought against beasts, giants, and mighty men, now carried out a different kind of battle, the battle to secure the future of Israel. This act marked a turning point in Benaiah's life. He was no longer just a warrior. He had become an enforcer of God's justice, a man trusted not only with war, but with the fate of the kingdom itself. He had played a critical role in ensuring that Solomon, the rightful king, took the throne and had eliminated those who would have brought division, bloodshed, and instability to the land. His loyalty was not to any single man, but to the divine order that God had established. His actions in these moments secured not only Solomon's rule, but also his own rise to power. While Joab had chosen the wrong side, aligning himself with Adonijah in a desperate bid to maintain his position, Benaiah had remained faithful to righteousness. And that faithfulness would soon be rewarded, as Solomon, recognizing his unwavering loyalty, would elevate Benaiah to a position greater than he had ever held before. The rebellion of Adonijah was not just about a struggle for power. It was a test of loyalty, a test of who would stand with God's chosen king and who would seek their own path. Many had fallen, consumed by their own ambition, but Benaiah had emerged stronger than ever. He had proven that true strength is not just in battle, but in standing firm in what is right, even when the stakes are at their highest. His role in these events was not just as a warrior, but as a guardian of God's will, a man who ensured that Israel remained in the hands of the one whom God had appointed. He had faced many enemies in his life, but perhaps his greatest battles were not fought on the battlefield, but in the courts of kings, where loyalty, wisdom, and justice were the greatest weapons of all. His story was far from over, and soon, his greatest promotion would come, the reward for a lifetime of unwavering faithfulness. Benaiah's rise to power under Solomon came with responsibilities far greater than leading armies into battle. He had already proven himself as a warrior of unmatched skill and a man of unwavering loyalty, but now he was called upon to serve as an instrument of justice and divine judgment. The transition of power from David to Solomon had not been without conflict, and Solomon's rule began with the necessary cleansing of those who had opposed God's will. Among them was Joab, the former commander of Israel's army, a man who had once been a mighty leader, but had let ambition and bloodshed define his legacy. Solomon, seeking to establish a rule of righteousness, could not allow men like Joab to remain unchecked, and so Benaiah was given his most difficult mission yet, to execute Joab, the man who had once led Israel's armies. Joab had been a fierce warrior, a man who had fought alongside David in countless battles, but his loyalty had always been conditional. He had betrayed David's commands multiple times, murdering Abner out of revenge and Amasa out of ambition. He had chosen to align himself with Adonijah in the rebellion against Solomon, hoping to secure his own power rather than submit to God's chosen king. When Adonijah was struck down, Joab knew that his fate was sealed. He fled, seeking refuge in the tabernacle of the Lord, clinging to the altar as a final, desperate attempt to claim divine mercy. In 1 Kings 2, verse 28-30, the scene is described. Then tidings came to Joab, for Joab had turned after Adonijah, though he turned not after Absalom. And Joab fled unto the tabernacle of the Lord, and caught hold on the horns of the altar. And it was told King Solomon that Joab was fled unto the tabernacle of the Lord, and behold, he is by the altar. Then Solomon sent Benaiah the son of Jehoiada, saying, Go, fall upon him. And Benaiah came to the tabernacle of the Lord, and said unto him, Thus saith the king, Come forth. And he said, Nay, but I will die here. Joab, a man who had slain others without mercy, now pleaded for his own life, refusing to leave the altar. He believed that the sacred ground would protect him, that his presence in the house of God would make it impossible for Solomon to have him executed. But Solomon saw through the hypocrisy. The altar was a place of refuge for the innocent, not a hiding place for the guilty. Joab had lived a life of violence, disregarding righteousness when it suited him, and now he sought to use God's presence as a shield against the very justice he had denied others. Benaiah, standing before him, gave him the opportunity to leave, but Joab refused. His fate was sealed, and Solomon's command was clear. In 1 Kings 2, verse 31-34, Solomon declared, Do as he hath said, and fall upon him and bury him, that thou mayest take away the innocent blood which Joab shed from me and from the house of my father. And the Lord shall return his blood upon his own head, who fell upon 2 men more righteous and better than he, and slew them with the sword, my father David not knowing thereof, to wit, Abner the son of Ner, captain of the host of Israel, and Amasa the son of Jether, captain of the host of Judah. Their blood shall therefore return upon the head of Joab, and upon the head of his seed forever. But upon David, and upon his seed, and upon his house, and upon his throne, shall there be peace forever from the Lord. So Benaiah the son of Jehoiada went up and fell upon him and slew him, and he was buried in his own house in the wilderness. With a swift and final stroke, Benaiah ended the life of the man who had once been David's greatest general. It was an execution, but more than that, it was an act of divine justice. Joab had shed innocent blood, had betrayed his king, and had sought to manipulate his way to power. His death was not an act of revenge, it was the fulfillment of God's judgment. And in carrying it out, Benaiah proved once again that he was a man who did not shrink from duty, even when the weight of it was heavy. But Joab was not the only man whose judgment Benaiah would carry out. Another name remained on Solomon's list, Shimei, the man who had cursed David during Absalom's rebellion. Shimei had been a vocal opponent of David, openly mocking and insulting him as he fled from his rebellious son. When David had regained the throne, Shimei had begged for mercy, and David had granted it, choosing not to execute him at the time. But Solomon understood that a man like Shimei could not be trusted. His loyalty was only to himself, and his words were as dangerous as any sword. Solomon did not strike him down immediately, but instead gave him a test of obedience. He commanded Shimei to remain in Jerusalem and never leave, warning that if he ever crossed the Kidron Valley, he would be executed. For 3 years, Shimei obeyed, but in time his true nature resurfaced. He left the city in pursuit of his own affairs, violating the king's order, believing that his actions would go unnoticed. But Solomon had been watching. His disobedience had sealed his fate. In 1 Kings 2 verse 44-46, Solomon called him before him. The king said moreover to Shimei, "Thou knowest all the wickedness which thine heart is privy to, that thou didst to David my father. Therefore the Lord shall return thy wickedness upon thine own head. And King Solomon shall be blessed, and the throne of David shall be established before the Lord forever." So the king commanded Benaiah, the son of Jehoiada, which went out and fell upon him, that he died. And the kingdom was established in the hand of Solomon. Once again, Benaiah was the one entrusted with the judgment of the king, the man who carried out the sentence of righteousness. There was no glee in these actions, no desire for bloodshed, only the solemn responsibility of ensuring that the throne of Israel remained in the hands of those chosen by God. These executions were not carried out in anger or for political gain. They were necessary to bring about the peace that had been promised to Solomon's reign. But these acts of justice carried a spiritual weight. Was Benaiah simply following orders, or was he acting as an instrument of God's divine will? In Israel, kings ruled not just by power, but by God's authority, and when justice had to be served, it was done not for the sake of personal vengeance, but to uphold the laws and commands of the Lord. Joab had lived by the sword, shedding innocent blood without remorse, and his execution was the consequence of his own choices. Shimei had spoken curses over God's anointed king, and later defied the king's direct command. His downfall was a result of his own rebellious heart. Benaiah's role in these executions was not that of a murderer, but of a man ensuring that righteousness prevailed. He had been a warrior all his life, but now his battles were not just against armies, but against those who sought to corrupt the kingdom from within. These were his hardest missions, not facing lions or giants, but standing as an enforcer of divine justice, knowing that the weight of every sword stroke was measured by God himself. Through these moments, Benaiah's legacy was not just one of battle, but of righteousness, duty, and unwavering faithfulness to God's chosen leaders. He had been entrusted with the most difficult tasks, and he had carried them out without hesitation, ensuring that Solomon's throne was established in peace as had been promised by God. His obedience, his courage, and his devotion made him more than just a soldier. They made him one of the most trusted and righteous men in Israel's history. With Joab gone and the kingdom now firmly under Solomon's rule, a new era began in Israel's history. The throne was secure, justice had been carried out, and peace was beginning to take root. Yet peace was never guaranteed, and the threats that surrounded Israel still lingered. Other nations watched with cautious eyes, waiting to see if Solomon's new rule would be a moment of weakness. The kingdom needed a military leader who could not only defend its borders, but also establish Israel as an unshakable force among the nations. There was only one man fit for the task: Benaiah, the son of Jehoiada. His unwavering loyalty, unmatched skill in battle, and righteous judgment made him the ideal successor to Joab. Solomon did not hesitate. He appointed Benaiah as the new commander-in-chief of Israel's army. In 1 Kings 2 verse 35, the Bible records this moment. And the king put Benaiah the son of Jehoiada in his room over the host, and Zadok the priest did the king put in the room of Abiathar. This was not just a change in military leadership, it was a shift in the very nature of how power was wielded in Israel. Where Joab had ruled with ambition, political cunning, and at times reckless brutality, Benaiah would lead with righteousness, discipline, and absolute obedience to God's will. Benaiah's appointment was a signal to the entire kingdom that Solomon's rule would not be defined by treachery and self-serving leadership, but by justice, faithfulness, and divine order. His years as the captain of David's personal guard had prepared him well. He had spent his life protecting the king, fighting Israel's enemies, and carrying out justice in the most difficult of times. But now, he was no longer just a protector. He was the leader of Israel's entire military force, responsible for securing the kingdom and expanding its influence. As commander-in-chief, Benaiah led multiple military campaigns, ensuring that Israel's enemies did not take advantage of the power shift in Jerusalem. The Philistines, Moabites, Edomites, and Arameans had long been adversaries of Israel, and they did not disappear simply because Solomon had taken the throne. Though Solomon was a king known for wisdom and diplomacy, even he understood that peace required strength. Benaiah was the man who made sure that Israel's enemies understood this as well. Under his leadership, Israel's army was transformed into one of the most powerful forces of its time. He modernized its strategies, strengthened its ranks, and ensured that its soldiers were trained not only in the art of war, but in the discipline of faithfulness and righteousness. The army was no longer led by a commander who sought his own glory, but by a man who fought for God, for the king, and for the people. Benaiah's leadership style stood in stark contrast to Joab's. While Joab had been an aggressive, politically driven leader who was willing to betray even his allies to maintain his position, Benaiah was a commander who led with honor. He did not rely on deception or ruthless ambition. He inspired loyalty through righteousness. His men followed him not out of fear, but out of respect, knowing that he would lead them with wisdom, courage, and unwavering dedication to God's commands. He was also a man of discipline, enforcing strict order within the ranks. The days of political infighting and unchecked violence within the military were over. Under Benaiah's rule, justice and obedience took precedence over personal ambition. He understood that a great army was not just one with strong warriors, but one where every soldier fought with a clear purpose, knowing that they were part of something greater than themselves. His faith played a crucial role in his leadership. Benaiah was not just a warrior, he was a man who walked with God, a man who understood that victory did not come from the strength of the sword alone, but from the favor of the Lord. He did not fight recklessly. He sought wisdom before battle, ensuring that every campaign he led was in alignment with God's will. Unlike Joab, who often took matters into his own hands and made decisions based on personal gain, Benaiah's actions were guided by faith and obedience. He did not wage unnecessary wars, nor did he seek to elevate himself above others. He ruled with humility, knowing that his position was not a result of his own ambition, but a divine calling. Benaiah's faithfulness extended beyond military conquest. He ensured that Israel's soldiers were not just warriors but men of integrity, understanding that an army's true strength was not just in its weapons but in the character of the men who wielded them. An army led by righteousness was an army that could not be shaken. During Solomon's reign, Israel's borders remained secure, its enemies subdued, and its military force unmatched. Benaiah's leadership ensured that Solomon could focus on building the temple, establishing alliances, and governing the people with wisdom without the constant threat of war hanging over the kingdom. The security of Israel during Solomon's reign was not just a result of diplomacy, but of the military strength that Benaiah upheld. His obedience to God's will was evident in every aspect of his leadership. He did not act outside of divine guidance, and his victories were not just his own, they were testimonies of God's faithfulness. Every battle he fought, every soldier he commanded, and every decision he made was a reflection of his deep trust in the Lord. Benaiah's appointment as commander-in-chief was not just a reward for his past loyalty, it was a fulfillment of God's plan. He had risen from the son of a priest to one of the most powerful men in Israel, yet he never let power corrupt him. His name was respected, not feared. His leadership was honored, not questioned. He had earned his place not through politics or manipulation, but through unwavering faithfulness, unmatched courage, and an unshakable commitment to righteousness. As he led Israel's army, he did so with the same strength and wisdom that had defined him from the beginning. He had once been the man who slew lions, giants, and mighty warriors. Now he was the man who guarded the kingdom itself, ensuring that Israel remained strong, that its people were safe, and that Solomon's rule was established in peace. His story was no longer just about battles fought with swords. It was about victories won through faith, about leadership forged in righteousness, and about a legacy built on unwavering devotion to God and his chosen king. In the history of Israel, many commanders would rise and fall, but none would match the honor, faithfulness, and divine favor that marked the life of Benaiah, the son of Jehoiada. As the years passed and Solomon's reign flourished, Benaiah continued to serve as the commander-in-chief of Israel's army, ensuring that the kingdom remained strong, its enemies subdued, and its borders secure. His leadership was a stabilizing force, and under his watch, Israel experienced an era of unparalleled peace and prosperity. The days of constant war that had marked David's reign faded, not because Israel had become weak, but because its enemies knew that any attempt to rise against it would be met with swift and decisive force. Benaiah had built an army that was disciplined, well-trained, and above all, committed to defending God's chosen kingdom. Yet, despite his military might, he was never known for seeking power for himself. He did not attempt to elevate his name above others, nor did he use his position for personal gain. His focus remained on serving God, protecting Israel, and upholding the will of the king. As time passed, the battlefield that had once defined his life gradually faded from his sight. The sounds of war horns, clashing swords, and battle cries that had once echoed in his ears grew silent. His later years were not spent in conquest, but in passing down his knowledge, ensuring that the next generation of warriors carried the same discipline, honor, and faith that had guided him. He trained new commanders, men who would lead Israel's army long after he was gone. And he ensured that they understood that true leadership was not about personal strength, but about obedience to God and unwavering loyalty to righteousness. Though the Bible does not provide details of Benaiah's final moments, his legacy is unmistakable. Unlike many warriors whose names faded into obscurity, his name remained recorded among Israel's greatest men, a testament to the kind of life he lived. He was not remembered for treachery like Joab, nor for rebellion like Adoniah. He was remembered as a man who fought with courage, led with honor, and stood firm in righteousness. The nation he had defended for decades stood stronger because of his service, and the army he had commanded remained a symbol of Israel's might. His impact extended beyond just military strength. Benaiah became a model of faithfulness, a warrior who demonstrated what it meant to trust in God completely. His battles had always been impossible by human standards, yet he had prevailed because he understood that victory was not won by the strength of a man, but by the power of God. This truth made him more than just a general. It made him an example for generations to come. Later Jewish traditions revered him as one of the greatest men of David and Solomon's era. And Christian interpretations saw in him a model of steadfast loyalty and unwavering obedience. He was a reminder that faith and courage were inseparable, that those who walk in righteousness will always be sustained by divine protection. His story teaches some of the most profound lessons found in Scripture. Obedience to God's commands is more important than human ambition. Benaiah's life was marked by complete submission to the will of God and his anointed kings. He did not act out of self-interest, nor did he seek to build his own kingdom. He followed orders with absolute faith, knowing that obedience to God's chosen leader was obedience to God himself. Unlike Joab, who relied on his own cunning and strength to secure power, Benaiah's rise was not through scheming, but through righteousness. His loyalty was rewarded, while Joab's treachery led to his downfall. Another lesson from Benaiah's life is the importance of courage, even in the face of overwhelming odds. Whether it was slaying a lion in a pit on a snowy day, facing 2 Moabite champions, or defeating an Egyptian giant with nothing but a staff, Benaiah never hesitated. He never looked at a situation and declared it impossible. He looked at it and knew that God was with him. This kind of faith is rare, but it is the kind that leads to extraordinary victories. His life proves that those who trust in God completely will be able to overcome obstacles that seem insurmountable. Benaiah's legacy also teaches the power of divine protection. Though he was a man of war, he was never consumed by violence. Unlike many warriors of his time, his strength did not corrupt him. He never betrayed his king, never sought his own glory, and never let ambition take root in his heart. He fought not for himself, but for the sake of righteousness. Because of this, God protected and exalted him, ensuring that his name would be remembered not for brutality, but for justice. This is a lesson for anyone who wields power. It is not the strength of one's hand that determines their success, but the righteousness of their heart. His life stands as an encouragement to those who feel called to stand for truth, even when it is difficult. Benaiah was often placed in positions where he had to make hard decisions, executing men who had opposed God's will, fighting battles that seemed unwinnable, and standing firm in moments of uncertainty. Yet each time he remained faithful. He did not shrink back from what was required of him. He understood that serving God meant being willing to do what was right, even when it was not easy. His example serves as a call to remain steadfast, to trust in God's plan, and to never waver in the face of opposition. In the end, Benaiah left behind a legacy that far outlived him. He was not a king, yet his name was honored in the records of kings. He was not a prophet, yet his life spoke of divine truth. He was not a priest, yet he walked with the kind of righteousness that pleased God. His story is one of unwavering faith, relentless courage, and absolute obedience. And though the sword he wielded eventually rusted, and the battles he fought faded into history, his legacy of faithfulness remains timeless. As long as the story of Israel is told, Benaiah's name will never be forgotten. A warrior, a guardian, a leader, and above all, a man who trusted in the Lord with all his heart. Benaiah's life is more than just a story of battle, victory, and leadership. It is a testament to faith, obedience, and the power of divine purpose. His name stands among the greatest warriors of Israel, not because he sought glory, but because he remained faithful in every moment, whether in battle or in leadership. His story is one that teaches powerful lessons that transcend time and remain just as relevant today as they were in ancient Israel. His life challenges us to examine our own faith, courage, and devotion to righteousness, showing us that true strength comes not from power alone, but from a heart that is fully committed to God's will. One of the most striking lessons from Benaiah's life is the courage to face impossible odds. He did not shrink back when confronted with challenges that would have made most men turn away. He faced a lion in a pit on a snowy day, he took on 2 of Moab's mightiest warriors, and he defeated an Egyptian giant armed only with a staff. Each of these battles should have ended in his death, yet he emerged victorious because he trusted in God, rather than his own strength. His courage was not reckless. It was the confidence of a man who knew that if God was with him, nothing could stand against him. This lesson calls us to confront the challenges in our own lives with the same kind of boldness, knowing that when we walk in obedience to God, no obstacle is too great to overcome. Benaiah's story also underscores the importance of faith and obedience in leadership. Many warriors in Israel were strong, but not all of them remained faithful. Joab, for instance, was a man of great military prowess, yet his disobedience and ambition led to his downfall. Benaiah, on the other hand, never wavered in his obedience to the king and to God. He was entrusted with executing justice, ensuring the kingdom was protected, and leading Israel's armies, not because of his strength alone, but because of his righteousness. His faithfulness teaches us that true leadership is not about power, but about obedience to God's will. It reminds us that the most successful leaders are not those who seek personal gain, but those who serve with integrity, wisdom, and humility. Another crucial lesson from Benaiah's life is that loyalty and righteousness are greater than power and ambition. Throughout his life, he was given opportunities where he could have chosen self-preservation or personal advancement, but he never compromised on his loyalty to David, to Solomon, and most importantly, to God. In a time when betrayal and political maneuvering were common, Benaiah remained steadfast. He did not act out of selfishness, nor did he use his power for his own benefit. Instead, he stayed committed to what was right, even when it was difficult. His unwavering loyalty led to his ultimate promotion as commander-in-chief of Israel's army, proving that those who walk in righteousness will be exalted in God's perfect time. His legacy is a reminder that our actions matter, that faithfulness is rewarded, and that those who trust in God will always find their place in His plan. We may not fight physical battles as Benaiah did, but each of us faces challenges that test our faith, our character, and our commitment to righteousness. His story encourages us to stand firm, trust in God, and walk boldly in the calling He has given us. Let's end with a powerful prayer together. Wherever you are, repeat after me. Lord, we thank You for the lessons we have learned from the life of Benaiah. His courage in the face of danger, his unwavering faith, and his complete obedience to You remind us of what it means to walk in righteousness. Help us, Lord, to stand firm in our own battles, to trust in Your strength when we feel weak, and to always seek Your will above our own desires. Give us the boldness to face our challenges with faith, the wisdom to lead with integrity, and the heart to serve You with unwavering devotion. Just as You guided and protected Benaiah, guide us in our journey, that we may walk in victory and fulfill the purpose You have for our lives. In Jesus' name, amen. Benaiah's life is one of the most inspiring and powerful stories in the Bible. But now, I want to hear from you. What part of Benaiah's story stood out to you the most? Was it his fearless battles, his faithfulness to David and Solomon, or his unwavering commitment to righteousness? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. I would love to hear your insights. Your engagement adds so much to this discussion, and I truly appreciate every one of you who takes the time to be part of this incredible journey through the Word of God. If you found this teaching insightful and inspiring, don't forget to like this video, share it with others who might need encouragement, and subscribe to this channel for more powerful biblical teachings. Your support helps us continue to bring deep, faith-filled content that explores the hidden treasures of Scripture. Thank you so much for watching and being part of this incredible journey through the life of Benaiah. His story is a reminder that faith, courage, and righteousness always prevail, and I pray that his example encourages you to stand strong in your own walk with God. Your time, your engagement, and your passion for learning God's Word mean everything, and I am truly grateful for each and every one of you. Stay strong, stay blessed, and I'll see you in the next teaching. God bless you all.